Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today, Rick. I've been fortunate to meet you a few times, and we were both honored to know Nelson Mandela, who I think both of us and most people who knew him called Madiba. As well as having an excellent first name, Richard, Richard is a wonderful writer, an editor, a storyteller, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from you today. We've got lots of our Literati book club members watching along, and I'd first of all like to say hello to you all. It's been wonderful reading Mandela's Way alongside you this month. It's amazing how you can learn new things revisiting a book and getting the perspective of other readers. And thank you all for your comments and conversations. And I'm going to, and I look forward to using some of your questions in my interview with Richard. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask Richard some questions from all of you and also some of my own. And because I'm not a seasoned journalist, I'm not going to pretend that I'm ad-libbing everything. I've got good notes. Some of it I'll ad-lib. So Richard, you worked very closely with Madiba over the years, and you became one of his closest companions. And I believe Madiba is even the godfather of your older son. You spent nearly 3 years traveling with Madiba, shadowing his every move and helping to write his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. So how did Mandela's Way grow out of that project, and why did you see the need for another different book?
Well, Richard, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and of the many reasons I'm grateful to Nelson Mandela, it's getting to know you a lot better. Without him, we wouldn't know each other at all. And thank you for selecting Mandela's Way. You know, I'm thinking about that question, and one reason I wanted to do Mandela's Way is that I loved Madiba. It was kind of impossible not to love him, and I wanted people to be able to see him the way I saw him. Long Walk to Freedom that we worked on is quite a formal book, and he was very certain about the kinds of things that he wanted to have in it, like the history of the ANC. You know, the history of the ANC is not in Mandela's Way, as you know, fortunately. I just wanted to have people see him as a man, as a human being, as a person with flaws as well as great virtues, and that's the way he wanted to be seen. So it's really about our relationship and the virtues and values that I saw in him.
Perfect, and lots of good lessons for people to learn from you know, getting all compiled into one book. I've got a few questions from the Literati Club. Or Literati Group. Carter, I don't know if you're still out, if you're out there. His question is, the African concept of Ubuntu comes up a few times in the book. Could you talk about what you understand Ubuntu to mean and what readers from more individualistic cultures can learn from it?
Yes, Madiba wrote a short introduction to Mandela's Way, and he quotes, I believe he quotes your great friend, Richard, Archbishop Tutu, who I think had the best definition that I've ever seen of Ubuntu, which is that human beings are human beings through other people, that we are people through other people, and that everything we do is about our relationships. There's nothing that we do where we individually rise or fall without some connection. And it's a lovely concept. It's a very African concept, but I also think it's a universal concept. I've been a fan of evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, which is sort of about our human beings' origins. And one of the theories of evolutionary psychology is something called reciprocal altruism. It's a fancy term for Ubuntu, the fact that we help each other, and through helping each other, we all benefit. And that's what Ubuntu means to me.
Yeah, no, it's so true. So another Literati person asks, and this is Molly, I think it's Molly Adverb, anyway. What chapter or aspect of Mandela's Way do you think is the most difficult for readers to really understand without knowing the man or being in his presence?
The most difficult to understand is that.
What chapter or aspect of Mandela's Way do you think is the most difficult for readers to really understand without knowing the man or being in his presence?
You know, one of the reasons I also did the book is because of, you know, as Mandela got older and became this sort of white-haired Santa Claus-like figure, people lost touch with the fact that, you know, he was a great revolutionary. He was, you know, the US government considered him a terrorist in 1962. He made many, many hard decisions in his life. And so many people sort of know him as the elder statesman. And one of the things I wanted to do in the book, I have a chapter about sort of the difference between tactics and strategy. And he used to talk about that all the time. And I mean, it's a hard truth, but he used to say, for example, for Gandhi, nonviolence was a principle, an undeviating principle that he wouldn't violate under any circumstances. But for me, Mandela said, nonviolence was a tactic. And if that tactic didn't help achieve freedom for my people, which was my great goal, I would abandon it. And he did. So I do want people to kind of know what a tough-minded politician he was in a very good way, as well as an incredibly, you know, generous and warm and compassionate person.
Yeah, I remember Margaret Thatcher calling him the greatest terrorist of our time, and what's extraordinary, of course, is that the greatest terrorist of our time became the most respected person in the world, and you know, there may be a thinner dividing line between the two than we give him credit for.
Well, he actually, Richard, told a story. It's in Long Walk to Freedom about when he decided to become the head of Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the Spear of the Nation, which was the military wing of the ANC. And he'd never fired a gun before in his life. And he got an air rifle at this farm where they were hiding outside of Johannesburg. And he was practicing, and he shot and killed a sparrow. And you know, almost tears came to his eyes when he was describing it. He said, I felt so terrible. You know, I'd never killed anything in my life before. I mean, so in his heart, of course, he never wanted to embrace violence, but his great goal was freedom for his people. So he was willing to do anything, and just shows the nature of the man, that he had so much compassion, so much heart, that things like that affected him.
Yeah, yeah, I remember shooting a sparrow out of the tree myself as a sort of 7-year-old with an air gun, and for a moment feeling quite pleased with myself. And then the cleaning lady came out and just gave me what for, and said, you know, yeah, what has that sparrow done to you that deserves to be shot out of the tree? So I haven't shot a sparrow out of a tree since. Right, another follower of the book club. They've got lovely names. Shanane, I hope I got that pronounced that right. Shanane. She asks, why did working with Mandela? How did working with Mandela change you personally? Do you feel that knowing him substantially changed your path in life, and how you may see things today?
Yes, I mean, I wish it had changed me even more. I mean, when I was working with him and working on Long Walk to Freedom, every day I had to think, what would Nelson Mandela do? I mean, that's a great way to live one's life, is to think, how would Nelson Mandela react to this? And that would mean that he wouldn't overreact and he wouldn't take it personally. And so I felt, particularly when I was working on Long Walk to Freedom, I was a better person. I was a better man. And I tried to keep those lessons. I mean, it's very hard to, you know, live with the kind of purity of Nelson Mandela. And I feel that in certain ways, knowing him has made me a better person. I'm less prone to take things personally. I'm less prone to overreact. You know, that some of those, you know, principles I talk about in Long Walk to Freedom, you know, always knowing it's a long game. I mean, those things have become embedded in me. I wish they were even more so, but he's definitely made me a better person.
Okay, it's my turn for a question now.
Okay.
Mandela showed us that great things can be achieved by leading through wisdom, by empathy and integrity, with no agenda other than humanity. You and I were both fortunate to know Madiba, and what I loved about Mandela's Way is the way that you intimately describe his true character and his spirit, rather than his actions and his achievements. Of the 15 lessons you share in the book, what did you learn from Mandela that you value the most?
Well, the lesson that spoke to me the most is the one about not being a victim of our own fears, that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is understanding your fears and coping with them and overcoming them. I mean, I think I remember telling you when I first started working with him and I was interviewing him, he would say, well, I was scared or I was terrified. And I had this reaction of, oh my God, Nelson Mandela is telling me he was scared. And I think one day I said to him, you're Nelson Mandela, how could you have been scared? And he said, Richard, it would have been irrational not to be scared. And that was a very Mandela line. I mean, I also tell the story of having flown with him when a plane, looked like we were going to be in trouble, and he never showed any fear. And when we came down, he leaned over to me and said, man, I was terrified up there. Well, that was Nelson Mandela. That's a great lesson for all of us, that we all scared. We're all terrified in different circumstances, but you can't let it kind of overcome you. So that was the big lesson for me. And actually, Richard, since you put it in, sort of personally, I'm going to turn the tables on you. And I'm curious what lesson from Mandela's Way, or just from knowing Madiba, kind of has most stuck with you and most influenced you. I'd be really curious about that.
I think that both Mandela and Archbishop Tutu, to me, the biggest thing they taught us was forgiveness. And obviously the Truth and Reconciliation Courts that were set up in South Africa to oversee the horrible crimes that white people had done to black people, were presided over by Archbishop Tutu, but set up by Mandela. And basically they said, look, we're not going to hang people. We're not going to, electrify people. If somebody's done something bad, they need to come and apologize to the relatives of the people they've done things bad to. And in that way, they gave the nation a chance to cleanse and become the nation it is today. Not perfect, but there's no nation in this world that is perfect at the moment. But an enormous amount better than it could have been. And I think forgiveness can be not just the big acts of forgiveness, but an ex-partner, maybe a marriage breaking up, realizing that that there's fault on both sides, and it didn't work out, and make sure that you remain friends for the rest of your lives. And if you fall out with somebody in life, making sure that you make up with them, and even if you think they've done something dreadful, and so on. So I think it was the forgiveness side. Anyway, my turn again.
Okay.
In 2007, Mandela and his wife Gracia Michelle, they founded the Elders. The Elders is an independent network of global leaders who work together for peace and human rights. And it was actually incubated by our foundation, Virgin Unite. The idea came about when my friend Peter Gabriel and I reflected on how many communities look to their elders for guidance and to help resolve disputes. And in an increasingly connected world, we wanted to bring together some of the world's wisest leaders, such as Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, Mary Robinson, Mandela, his wife Gracia Michelle, President Carter, and so on, to use their collective experience and influence to give the world some much needed guidance across our most pressing problems. I just wanted to know what you thought of the Elders, its achievements as an organization, and and yeah, I'm a little biased on this question.
Okay, well, I'm similarly biased. I mean, I think it's a magnificent organization. It's a fantastic idea. By the way, as you know, Graça Machel is one of the world's great leaders herself in her own right, and is an extraordinary person. You know, the older I get, I realize I'm not so sure that people have wisdom, but they have the collection of experience makes you not overreact to things, and it helps you understand new situations that are like ones that you've gone through before. And I think the value of the elders is that these are men and women who are not going to overreact to things, that are going to be measured, to use Madiba's favorite term for leaders. And I just wish they were more involved in the day-to-day and year-to-year crises of the planet. I think they'd have a considerable role to play in the coronavirus pandemic. I wish that more governments and more countries would rely on them for guidance, or even to, you know, kick the ball over to some organization that could be impartial about it. I think it's a great organization, and I wish it was even more involved in the day-to-day affairs of the planet.
Yeah, no, fair. I mean, I think with the elders' belief at the moment is to work behind the scenes, not to, you know, not to be too out front. And you know, so they'll they'll go to conflict regions and try to knock heads together and resolve conflicts. You know, they'll go and, you know, see President Putin. They'll go and see the head of Iran. You know, they'll do the head of China. You know, they'll do a lot of work behind the scenes quite quietly. And it's a debate Peter and I have with the elders as to whether there should be more interaction with the public, let the public asking them questions. You know, whether they should do a State of the Nation address every year. But anyway,
where do you come out on that?
Well, when we set up the elders, we made absolutely clear that it's you know, we're advisors from the background, and it's up to them to make these decisions, and we don't want to have anybody interfere in those decisions. I think that they know that that Peter and I would like, you know, would like a State of the Nation address every year, because, you know, so it is using our promotional skills in a sense to get them better known. And I mean, it's incredible spending hours and hours listening to them. You know, they're a remarkable group of people. You know, they were chosen because they are remarkable. And yeah, it would be great. It would. I think personally, I think it would be good if more people related to them. But okay, so I am going back to our Literati reader questions, and another interesting name, Miss Diva Josiah, and she asks, Mandela teaches readers worldwide many lessons through your book, but what is one lesson that you didn't include in the book that you think it's important for us to know?
That's a hard question.
They're often the worst.
You know, I'm gonna sort of do an oblique answer to it, because and in reference to something that you were talking about before when you were saying the lesson of forgiveness. So many people have said to me over the years, I can't believe that he came out and he wasn't bitter, that he forgave everyone and was able to completely move on. And one of the things that I knew, because I was close to him during that time, was that wasn't the case. He was bitter, as any human being would be. He did have grudges against people who had harmed him. I mean, when you think about it, he spent 27 years in prison. It's pretty hard to not come out without having some reservations about it. But his genius, and it's a similar virtue to the virtue of kind of overcoming your fear, is that he overcame his bitterness. He realized that was a short-term goal that was antithetical to his long-term goal, which is freedom for his people, creating a country where white and black and every color could get along. And he understood in a very basic way that he could never let anyone for any moment see any bitterness or any resentment. And he was a conscious thing on his part. I mean, that's I think is a great lesson. And again, it's the sort of thing like, oh, he's not a man who was so virtuous that he didn't have any of these human flaws that we all have. He did have them. What made him great was that he repressed them. He put them down because he realized that as a public person trying to achieve these goals, he could not be seen that way. And again, that's what made him great.
Yeah, I remember I was lucky enough to know him when he was actually, when he was president, and you could see the tough side of him come out. I mean, there was one occasion when we were helping put up the Steve Biko statue in East London that you know, on the stage with him were all the other heads of different parties in South Africa, and with great sense of humor, he wickedly, you know, would pull Buthelezzi's leg and the other's leg, at the same time making sure that all 100,000 people in the streets were up and clapping and cheering and having a good time. But there was you could definitely see there was the tough side there as well.
Absolutely.
So let's see what questions next. Patrick asks, Patrick, come on, you could have had a more interesting name than Patrick. what is your most, I suppose Richard's pretty boring too, but anyway, what is your most vivid memory of when Madiba was extra vulnerable and real?
You know, he was very vulnerable and sensitive about winning. And I think his largest moment of public vulnerability was that news conference that he had where he announced that they were separating. I mean, he really was a wounded man there, and he was sensitive in talking about her. It was interesting. He was able to talk about her in a very kind of forthright and loving way about their early years together. But as we started talking about, you know, when he came out of prison, he became very reticent, and I think he was, you know, he was very hurt by a lot of the things that happened there, and he did have that vulnerable side. I mean, you know, his whole, you know, the struggle was his life, as he said, and the struggle made him kind of have to forswear so many things in life that bring people pleasure and love. And, you know, he lost his eldest son while he was in prison. I mean, he was estranged from Winnie and estranged from his daughters whom he loved. He, you know, had a large family that he cared about that he just was disconnected from. I mean, all of those things, I think, hurt him and wounded him. And in many ways, you know, as I was saying before, he tried not to let that show. He, you know, he wanted to feel pain for the country, not feel pain for himself.
No, for sure. Okay, it's my turn, I think. One of the most profound moments in Mandela's way was when you wrote, courage is not the absence of fear. It's learning to overcome it. And this simple line reminds us of his humanity and the realization that it's okay to be scared in life. But it's how we choose to react to fear was discussed a lot in the comments section of the book club. Are there any moments that stand out in your mind where you witnessed Mandela showcase this?
You know, I had a really extraordinary moment with him when I worked with him. You know, one of the great pleasures of working with him is that we would go down to the Transkei, where he had a little house, you know, within sight of the village where he was born, and I would stay there with him, and we would take these, you know, lovely long walks very, very early in the morning. He was a very, very early riser, like 4 o'clock or 4:30 a.m. And one day we took this long walk, and we got back from the walk, and he got a phone call telling him that Chris Hani had been assassinated. Chris Hani was the leader of the South African Communist Party, a young man, young brilliant man who was the idol of young South Africans. And this was before the first election, and he was afraid that the country was going to be pivoted into civil war because of this. And what was just extraordinary is that he just reacted very calmly. He got off the phone. He, kind of looked at me, although he wasn't looking at me, to think for a second. And then he got back on the phone and he said, I need a flight to Johannesburg. I need to go back to Johannesburg. I need to address the people of South Africa about this. I mean, it was a frightening moment, and I'm sure he was frightened in that moment, but he realized that the thing to do was to take action on his own part that would kind of bring the country together. I mean, when you think about it, he wasn't president of the country. President de Klerk was president of the country. He was in effect the opposition leader, and yet he went in front of the country to speak to them about what happened. And I thought it was a moment of extraordinary courage, extraordinary political clarity, and showed, his extraordinary strength.
And basically, he asked his own people to not to rise up over it, and did, in a sense, did de Klerk's job, but did it, much more powerfully himself. And exactly. the other moment of extreme fear that one could imagine that Mandela had was when he is facing the judge, and he's almost definitely going to be sentenced to death, and he makes, I think, one of the greatest speeches I've ever read. I don't know if you can remember the last 3 lines of that speech. If you can, I'd love you to tell them, because I can't. But it was, there's no way he showed fear. He just said, it's up to you to decide. Well, you remind us about it.
Yes, he was. It was the Rivonia trial, where he eventually was sentenced to life in prison, but almost everybody thought they would get the death penalty. And he gave this famous speech from the dock. I agree with you, it's one of the world's greatest speeches. And the end, that final paragraph is, I have fought white discrimination, I have fought black discrimination for the freedom of my people. It is a cause I hope to live for and achieve, but if needs be, my Lord, it is a cause for which I am prepared to die. And those were the last words of the speech from the dock, and he was prepared to die. And in fact, I believe it was George Bezos, not to just put a little note of humor in here, George Bezos, as a young lawyer, said, I think you would have a little better chance of getting just the life sentence instead of the death penalty if you say my Lord in your final sentence. And he did.
Well done in remembering those words. They bring a tear to my eyes every time I hear them. So beyond your work with Madiba, you had a fascinating career as a journalist, as an editor, as an author, as a commentator, as an advisor, as a combatant against disinformation, and even as an undersecretary within the Obama administration. Are there any important lessons you've learned from your own experiences in life that you would add to the book?
It wasn't in the book. I mean, it was one of the great life lessons, and I tried to learn this at an early age, is this idea of taking nothing personally, that people, we're all human beings, we're all narcissistic in a sense, and we're all thinking about ourselves. And when people do things that are sometimes unhelpful or unkind, they're thinking more about themselves than they are thinking about you. And I just try not to take anything personally. I don't bear grudges. I mean, you were talking before about forgiving people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if people have trespassed against me, I seem to forget about it. So I'm grateful for that. But I also try to never see myself as the protagonist in the play. Everyone is the hero or the heroine of their own play, and we're all just kind of bit parts. So that's a lesson. I mean, I think Madiba would agree with it, but that's not a lesson in the book.
Yeah, beautifully put. Okay, I'm going to allow myself one more. After working with both Mandela and Barack Obama, are there any notable similarities or differences between their styles of leadership, in your opinion?
Yes, I actually think there's a lot. And the idea of, well, not taking things personally, the idea of, as Obama said, not getting too high or getting too low. As I mentioned, Madiba's greatest praise for a statesperson was that he or she was measured. I mean, Barack Obama may be the most measured person I've ever met in my entire life, which I think is a great virtue of leadership. I think they're kind of kindred spirits. And what's amazing, in a way, is that Barack Obama had these things or learned these things without having to go to prison for 27 years. I mean, Madiba learned them in that crucible of prison in so many ways that changed him and gave him strength. And Barack Obama, seemed to have had a lot of those things from an early age.
That's so true. All right, it's up to me to invite some other people in here. And another fascinating name, Trumpet Lady asks, what did it take for Mr. Mandela to trust you? How do you think Mr. Mandela was able to truly trust people when so much injustice surrounded him during his lifetime?
Well, he did come to trust me, and in fact, the last time I saw, not the last time I saw him, but when we were finishing the book and I was leaving, he'd never done this before. He called me comrade, which I did appreciate. And in retrospect, I think maybe it was so he thought I would treat him better in the book, like if he called me comrade. But
it was an autobiography, not a biography. So
yes,
he didn't have to do
yes.
that.
But I do think, I don't hope the story doesn't take too long. When I first went down there to work with him, they kept me waiting for like 3 weeks, and I was very, very frustrated. And when I finally got in to see him, we were chatting for a couple of minutes. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to see him for the first time. And after about 10 minutes, he said, "Well, Richard, I assume after a few more conversations like this, you will have enough for the book." So I'd had all this pent-up frustration, and I said, "Mr. President, if you think we're going to have enough for the book after this, you're crazy." And I pointed my finger at him, at which point his bodyguard and Barbara Masekela came in and escorted me out of the office. And I thought, oh my God, the book project is over. And I begged Barbara to let me get back in to see him to apologize. And finally, after a couple of weeks, I did. And I got in there and I was a little nervous. And I said, "Madiba, I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry I was so," and I don't know why this word popped in my head. I said, "I'm sorry I was so brusque with you." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "If you thought you were brusque with me, you must be a very gentle young man indeed." And we both burst out laughing. And it was like, my God, he hit over the head by guards and in solitary confinement. Me calling him crazy, I probably didn't even, get to number one on the, And so, but in a funny way, there was a bond that we created. I mean, we laughed a lot together, and I think he saw that I was on his side, and I think that also is what engendered a trusting relationship.
Yeah. The next question is from Meredith Michael, and some of these questions might overlap with others, so apologies if that's the case, but they didn't know what other people had asked. In the years since Mandela's passing, what do you think has been his greatest lasting legacy?
Well, I do think his country was on the knife edge of a civil war that would have been catastrophic in a way that we probably haven't seen in the modern era in a sort of a first world country. The fact that he achieved a peace, a lasting peace in South Africa, in many ways is his greatest achievement. It is indeed a rainbow nation, as Archbishop Tutu called it, and I think that is a model for Richard, you mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I mean, I think that template can be used all around the world.
Completely
and
agree.
I've even proposed it in the United States, given what we've gone through. And so I think that's the smallest circle of legacy is a peaceful, prosperous South Africa. The largest is this idea of forgiveness and of people having to work together for their mutual benefit. That was, that's Ubuntu on a grand scale.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time campaigning against the death penalty, and obviously Mandela didn't agree with the death penalty. And it's extraordinary that it's countries like Iran, Russia, China that still do it, and sadly one or two states in America even still do it. And yeah, I mean, hopefully maybe over the next few years we can finally see the last person being executed in America. Okay, Madiba was a man full of surprises, and I was always amazed by his ability to light up a room and make people smile. I loved the way he'd break into dance at any given moment. He came to Ulusaba, a game reserve we have, to launch the Elders, and despite horribly messed up knees from cracking rocks in prison, etc. He danced with all the staff as he arrived. From the years you spent together, was there anything about Madiba that surprised you?
I found him constantly surprising. I mean, I know this isn't exactly what the question is asking, but when you think about it, and you spending time with someone, he'd only been out of prison about a year and a half or almost 2 years when I first started working with him. And I remember going out with him to a hotel in Natal on a New Year's Eve, the first New Year's Eve we worked together. And it was a cover band, and they were doing Beatles songs. And I realized he hadn't heard any of the songs. We were listening to songs that, hundreds of millions of people around the world know and know every lyric to. They were all new to him. I mean, he was bopping his head and all of that, but it just was a kind of extraordinary moment of realization. I mean, of the things that he missed out on. And I think what was extraordinary about him is that, I mean, he missed out on the women's liberation movement. I mean, he missed out on all kinds of things, and he had to learn and get up to speed very, very quickly. I mean, he was a fantastically quick study with things. And there were some ideas and things that were new to him that he took him a little longer. HIV crisis, I think he took him a little bit longer to get up to speed with that. But I was surprised by the things that he didn't know, and then surprised by how quickly he learned them, at the age of 72 or 73. I mean, he was an elder already.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't that far behind on the HIV crisis. I mean, he realized, and this is from my experience of knowing him, that Thabo Mbeki was wrong in trying to stop antiretroviral drugs being distributed in South Africa. That Thabo Mbeki, he felt was killing, hundreds of thousands of his own people, and I had the privilege of working with him on a concert called the 7666.
Yes.
Sorry, the 46664 concert, or whatever his number that he had on his skin from when he was in prison, and he made some incredible speeches there about the need for people to protect themselves and about the need for people to get treatment. But maybe there was a few months missing at the beginning of all that. So it has been 7 years since Madiba passed away. But I think we'd all agree his lessons on leadership, hope, and courage are more relevant now than ever. And I just wonder what you missed most about Mandela.
You know, I mean, you mentioned it, Richard. He was sunny. Being in his presence was like being outside on a beautiful, summer afternoon. And I remember when leaving him after working with him, it was like, like my life felt like a cloudy day for quite a long time. I think we all, no matter how old you are, you always look for a father figure, somebody who you can depend on, and he was a figure like that in my life. Not like I would call him to, ask him a question about some small issue, but over the years there were things that I talked to him about. He met my family. It was just such a golden part of my life knowing him, and I miss that. Yeah,
no, we shared birthdays together, July the 18th, and for 10 years, every morning I had my birthday, Mandela would ring us up to wish us a happy birthday, and it would be, whether it was Grusha that reminded him, but but I certainly miss those calls, all right, you're coming near the end. In this current climate, where we're dealing with a global pandemic, where we're dealing with great economic uncertainty, immense political upheaval, what advice do you think Mandela would give to leaders around the world?
I think the advice that he would give is to be measured in their reaction, to be guided by the science, which he was, to persevere, to understand that it's a long game. It's not just about a few quick wins. I think he would see the existential nature of the threat for the threat the environment has, the threat where I would say the virus is actually part of an environmental threat, and he would also see it as something that was beyond politics, that had nothing to do with politics or political party or allegiance. That this was a threat that endangered everybody, and that leaders need to treat it that way head on, and not play politics with it. And and unfortunately, for better or for worse, we've seen leaders around the world treat the virus and treat science as though it's a political issue, or wearing masks. And I think he would be appalled by that, and wouldn't succumb to it. I mean, it'd be wonderful to have him around as a figure, a rallying figure for everybody right now.
Yeah, too true. I think again, one of his his greatest things that he did was decide to step down from power after 4 years. I mean, he would have still been most likely president of South Africa right up to his death if he'd wanted to. But as you know, he felt very, very, very strongly that leaders should have a limited term, and then they should step down, and so that there's no danger that a country becomes run by one person, and that it continues to be run by an elected group of people. And maybe some other countries we should take that on board, or some leaders should take that on board. Anyway, I just want to say thanks so much, Rick, and thanks so much to the Literati Club. It's been fascinating listening to you. Sorry, I'm not an experienced journalist, and I had to use notes instead of just ad-libbing all the way through. But there were a lot of important questions from the people who are part of the club, and wish you all the well, and wish all the people who sent in the questions and others who've been listening well. And I hope you all learned something from this. Thank you.